Welcome to Parenting Beyond the Headlines. I'm Amy Alamar, and I'm with my co-host and friend, Sarah Cody. We're very excited to have you back today. We're going to be talking about the social lives of children.
Yeah, so we have Caroline Maguire here with us. She is the author of Why Will No One Play With Me? But as you know, listener, we like to sort of jump off stories that have been in the news, flesh them out a little bit here on the podcast. And we have seen in the news lately that children's happiness level is at its lowest. That was reported recently in The Guardian. We're also seeing articles in U.S. News about how parents can manage play dates and other social outings. We also saw a piece recently in the HuffPost, personal coach, strategist, mom. So Caroline, kind of comment on those headlines first of all. It makes it sound almost like being a mom and dad these days is a job, a coaching role.
I feel like it is tougher to be a mom or dad these days because I think, the story about children's happiness being at its lowest, I hope that we all make pains to rectify that. And I think a lot of that has to do with how hectic and crazy our lives are and how little children get to play and have free time. So it does feel a little to me like we're making parenting into pretty stressful endeavor.
Parenting, and it sounds like being a child is getting more stressful too. We've seen in other podcasts as well.
Absolutely. And I think, the information bears that out, that being a child is tougher right now.
So talk to us a little bit before we get into the actual socializing of it, right? So how do we create more space for that playtime and that development?
I think one of the best ways to create more space is to really look at what are you doing and why, right? Because it's so easy to be caught up in the noise, but we know that one of the best things for kids is unstructured play. So they have free time, they play, there's no adult supervision. And we also know that that's how you form social skills, which are crucial to later workplace stuff. So when we look at our priorities and how we spend our time, a lot of times I feel like we get caught up. So what are you doing and why? And what's good for your family? Because everyone's different.
So there's that issue with finding enough playtime. But I was really struck when I got the press pitch about your book by the title of your book, Why Will No One Play With Me? And as a parent, we've kind of been there. We've seen those instances. And it can be painful for a parent. It can be painful for a child when you don't see them sort of fitting in on the playground or what have you. So dive into how you decided to kind of tackle this topic. Did you feel that, kids with real social issues get help, but then there are kids who maybe don't get, the help at school or have an aide or whatever, but still have issues that we parents need to assist with?
Absolutely. So if you're a child and you have a diagnosis and you have certain social processing disorders, you get help, right? And your parents still might need to know how social skills are formed and still might need Why Will No One Play With Me, but you do get help. But if you're quirky, if you're awkward, if you are in a school, I'm working with a school right now with just per capita, too many mean girls, and so you might be in a situation as a parent where you don't know quite what to do and you need a playbook and you need to know, where do I get started? What do I say? What do I pay attention to? Where do I push? Where do I let things go? And so the whole idea was that I saw this over and over again where parents were literally getting PhDs in order to help their child. And I said, well, you shouldn't have to get a PhD to help your child. And so my goal was to give parents this guidebook on how do you do this so they can dive in and use it for any social situation.
So let's take that very simple social situation that I just mentioned. When a child is young, if you don't see him fitting in on the playground, playing what the other kids want to play, what do you do as a parent? Do you let him figure that out? Do you talk with him? Is it a little bit of both? Is it a process?
It's a little bit of both, and it is a process. So, some kids pick up on this stuff intuitively and some kids don't. And so when a kid isn't fitting in on the playground, one of the things that Why Will No One Play With Me teaches you is how to talk to them about it, how to figure out kind of what's going on, and then how to build the skills, because often kids have trouble jumping in, or they've been rejected, so they just stop trying. And finally, another big piece is, sometimes kids have like a story that they're telling themselves, and the story might not be productive. It might be like, they should ask me to join them. And we're old enough to know that's never going to happen. So it's kind of one of those things where we as parents need like a specific exercise to kind of help them learn so that they move forward, and it's not just you talking and telling and telling and telling them.
And can you talk just a little bit about how and when a parent should step in? So I think sometimes nobody will play with me on the playground is like, well, it was just an off day, or, maybe you did something and it's not that you have a social disorder, right? So how do I know as a parent, okay, this is the time where I maybe call the school or set up a play date, whatever the tip may be for that particular child?
I mean, I think if it's more than one day and it's a persistent problem, and you're hearing about it a lot, you want to do something, because sort of lag time is lost time. So, just the way the brain is, when they're younger, we have more of a chance to build these skills. It's not that we can't do it at 60, but it's harder. So there's nothing that makes you a hyper parent or a helicopter parent by, getting some information, talking to them about it, seeing what's going on, and then helping them with Why Will No One Play With Me? Because here's the thing. Every kid goes through phases where they need a little help. And if your kid is feeling unhappy, then we want to help them, because then they're struggling.
Is it important for a parent perhaps to role play, say to them at the home? Because we had some experience with this, and I felt that my son was being stubborn. Like he wanted to play one way, and those
Right.
kids didn't necessarily want to play that way too. So there had to be a little bit of teaching of flexibility and open-mindedness. So is role playing at home and saying, hey, you might be making them feel like this, but if you're a little more open, they might feel like this, is that a tactic?
That's absolutely a tactic. And the other thing you can do is you can, we're about to have a whole season of really social activities. So you can role play and then pick times when they're going to practice being flexible, right? We're all going to have to be flexible this holiday season. And we can say to the kid, you're going to go to this party, or you're going to go to this situation or this play date. And your mission is, even when you feel that, gee, I want to play this way, to adapt. And you show them what it looks like, right, to adapt, and you role play. And then, let's go out and let's try it with play dates, with family. And then you're really helping them get like, oh, look how this works and how the benefit.
Sometimes I feel like I'm almost pushing on my kids, what I think should be happening, and sort of this I set an expectation, and so I do a lot of work on trying to let go of my expectation of what will happen, right? So that could be in a social setting with just kids or with families and friends of the family. And I'm just sort of curious, what's your take on setting that expectation? Because if you go in and you want to role play with your kid and you want to set them up for success, you have to have some expectation of how that conversation is going to go, right? Or you want to at least give your kid an idea. But really, I think taking away the expectation and letting them kind of explore and figure it out is maybe better for these situations. I'm not sure.
Well, it's a great topic, because actually you're absolutely right. Taking the expectation away is kind of key. One of the hardest parts that I talk about in Why Will No One Play With Me is to actually kind of detach a little bit and realize that their truth is their truth. And even if you want to steer them a certain way, or maybe even that certain friends are better for them, the more we can sort of demonstrate to them, and this is really what the exercises in the books do, it demonstrates it to them so they experience it. So it's not me telling them that playing that way alienates other kids, or playing that way isn't the best way. It's them learning it for themselves, but you're like a guide, you're a shepherd. So they're learning, but you, yes, are detaching also, because they may not learn on our timeline. So this may be like a very painful conversation and then another.
I know from other expert interviews that we are really not supposed to put our social anxiety on our kids, right? So, I mean, if we remember times when we were left out, or we see something with them on the playground and say, oh God, that makes me hurt because I remember feeling that way, it's kind of important for us to not put that on them so obviously, correct?
It is, and it's so hard. And I admit to you, and you know, it's a matter of public record now that I was bullied and left out. And it is hard because, you know, you feel it and you feel it much more. But it is true because our social anxiety takes something that is, you know, a molehill and it makes it a mountain. Also, I think there's something very calming about parents being able to sort of have that calm, have that detachment. But it's work, you know,
Yeah.
because it's not going to be always easy for you, and you may have to sort of do a little mindful meditation before you know, face that situation.
So let's get to the teenage years, the tweens and teens, right? So we've, you know, I think when I hear play date or on the playground, I typically think of younger kids. So, you know, how does this translate? Because you said we could learn this at 60. You know, how does this translate to parenting the tween and the teen?
Well, the first way is that there's a bunch of chapters about troubleshooting and resistance, because we know that it's totally appropriate. Teens and tweens are really kind of challenging sometimes. The other thing is that I don't use the cute visuals with teens or tweens because they, you know, think that they're too cool for that. The other thing is that you can use every single exercise. I mean, I do with teens and tweens, but they're not going to have play dates, right? They're going to hang out. And some of the work you're doing with teens and tweens is, if you want friends, you have to reach out. So let's text them together, or let's think of how you're going to manage that. There's a lot more logistics involved. And I also think, to your point earlier, like there's a lot more of who are you friends with? What's going on? And all these really complicated dynamics. And that's where the coaching technique of talking with your child collaboratively is really helpful, because it's really easy as a parent or a coach to feel frustrated.
Yeah, I can see that. I also feel like teenagers, everything happens online. And we've done this in many podcasts, right? Like we've talked about technology and texting and all social media beyond texting. I feel like there's got to be some special way to talk to them about how to talk to friends via technology. Do you go into that?
I don't really go into that because it is such a widely covered topic, and my goal was things that people just can't get anywhere else. But what I will say about that is that, you know, when kids have a sense of how to read the room, how to read people, how to understand and step into someone else's shoes, that becomes so much easier because they can learn to imagine their audience. So there's a whole tool track about who is your audience in the book. And one of the reasons is, if you can think about your audience, then you can think about what message you're sending. And so a little quick example is, I had a kid the other day who wrote a teacher, "Hey." And you don't really write to, you know, a 60-year-old, very proper teacher, "Hey." And so, you know, if he had thought about who he was writing to, then he would have been able to rectify that. So some of these are the same skills we learned back in the day. They're just now in a different forum. And, you know, it's more complicated because there's so many different forums.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is so interesting, like learn to read the room, learn who your crowd is. I had an expert say to me once, you know, a lot of kids kind of self-correct this stuff with themselves because they see what the other kids are doing. They say, oh, I don't want to act this way. They're all acting this way. And that's kind of a natural human thing. And there are some kids who really don't sense that or feel that and self-correct, you know? So I think the audience is an interesting way to phrase it. I have a little bit of a mom rant. Am I allowed to do it and see how you guys react?
Yeah.
I've always found it difficult as a mom to urge my kids to be quirky, be themselves, you know, let you shine, all that. And then also have moments where you got to learn to be flexible and fit in. Sometimes you got to go with what other people do. And you might learn you like it too. So is this really a fine balance for all ages? I feel like being sure that they're them and right, but also being open.
Yeah, and I get this question a ton when I give talks. People, somebody always raises their hand and says, "But what about the fact that my kid is creative, wonderful, the next Steven Spielberg?" And I'm like, I want them to be that.
Yeah.
But when someone can't find their people, like they can't find a group to fit in with, or they're alienating other people, or they're not going to have choices to become the next Steven Spielberg because they can't go on an interview, they can't, go up to a professor, they can't really manage these things. That's beyond sort of just quirky and unique. It's into your life choices are more limited. And so I always say to people, by changing and adapting your social communication, you're not going to lose the core of who you are.
Right.
You're just going to have more choices. And then you're making a choice. I'm making a choice to say something. I'm not saying it and then having huge repercussions.
I think that's a great point. You're not changing who you are. You're changing sort of your approach.
Yeah.
And I like that framework because I think that so often, my dad always used to tell us life isn't fair. That was the mantra I grew up with, right?
Mine too.
So, I want to be who I am, but if I don't have my people, right? Like if I don't even have one person to throw things at and to be a sounding board, I can't really be who I am because nobody's there to see it, right? It's like I kind of have to make compromise, and I have to, that there's a greater value in that and a greater enjoyment of life with that.
Right. And I think it's so hard because as a parent, we need to be absolutely, in love with our child and help them and see all the best in them. But I don't think we're losing that by saying, okay, here's the thing, here's the life skills you need. These are life skills. These aren't just, nice to haves. We know that 70% of people in the workplace who are not successful because of social skills.
Wow.
Right? So it's a huge number. And so now we have to think of this as, I'm not trying to change anyone's basic core. I'm trying to make sure that they are given life's choices and able to achieve their dreams.
We like to be real user-friendly here on Parenting Beyond the Headlines. So let me give you a scenario, and you walk us through, if you don't mind, how a parent would react. Say there is a freshman in high school girl who has maybe one or two friends, isn't happy, isn't getting along with, say, her teammates, whatever. What would the mom do in that scenario?
Okay, so the first thing is you want to open lines of communication, because you can become the person who your child sounds things off of. And that piece of communicating and how to ask questions and not interrogate is really, really important. The next thing is, I want to know what makes her unhappy about her friends. There's an exercises in Why Will No One Play With Me called the Flavors of Friendship. And it's all about who are your friends and how enjoyable is friendship. Because friendship should be enjoyable, right? You should feel reciprocity, you should feel happiness. So I want to know what's not enjoyable for this girl. Like, what is she going through? And then I want to know, what is it that she needs to look at in her life that she needs to change? Maybe she needs to join more stuff so that she has more choices. Maybe those two people are hemming her in and kind of demanding her time, and she has other friends, but she's not allowed to be with them. That happens a lot. What is it that's getting in the way? And now when we know all that, we can start making changes. And the communication techniques, especially with teenagers, because teenagers don't sort of say like, "Yay, mom, I'm glad we solved that." Those communication techniques in the book of Open Questions are going to be key, because now you can help her explore, well, if you don't want to make a change, why? And what changes do you want to make? And okay, what's hard about this? And sort of be there as a guide through this whole process, and wherever necessary, build the skills, right? If it's, I can't talk to new people, so I'm stuck with these two friends and I'm unhappy, okay, let's build that skill.
All right. I think sometimes teen girls like to put it on other girls. You know what I mean? It's that they're mean, and we all three of us have commented on kind of the mean girl culture, which is there. But is there sometimes times when girls have to not put it out on somebody else and say, maybe it's the way I'm reacting to this situation too?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people who are overreactive, and we all want to have people have their feelings, but some people overreact, and a lot of times they don't know they're overreacting. So again, we're there to give as a parent perspective, not by saying, oh my gosh, you always overreact, you're not that unhappy, and telling, but by asking questions and helping her look at what is it.
I think too, a lot of what you're saying suggests some ownership of your own behavior and recognition of who you are, right? And how you can react in a situation. I think that's really valuable because as we talk about the tweens and the teens, we are less involved. We're still an influence in their life, but we are much less involved, and their peers play a bigger role. So they kind of have to be able to own it in their own space. And we won't hear about a lot of it. So we have to help them be independent. So I guess my question for you would be, as a parent of teens, what is an easy and or accessible way to check in with them so that it doesn't feel, because we don't have all the information.
Right. Well, I think the more you have those times where you're talking casually and you can hear what's going on, and you have the kind of relationship where you can ask them, well, what do you mean, so-and-so is being difficult? Or what do you mean, you ended up at that restaurant, but you didn't want to be there? The more you're going to be able to check in, and it's not some big epic conversation. It's just that relationship. And then knowing that teenagers go through phases where they're not telling you as much. But I think the biggest thing is that if we're more neutral, they're going to come to us more. I mean, there's all kinds of research that shows this. So I think that's the biggest way. And I think also the more we teach every child about friendship and what it's supposed to be like, it's supposed to be enjoyable, the more they'll have that confidence to say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't work for me.
Great advice. Thank you so much. And I think that's super valuable. So stepping a little bit back and validating their feelings and not judging and not telling them how to feel.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also not projecting our social anxiety on them.
And also,
yes.
and also.
You like my hand motions? The podcast listeners can't see them. Very excited over here. Well, Caroline, thank you. We're so excited because this was a great conversation that is very important for parents, and we appreciate your book. Where can folks find your book or more about you?
Sure. You can literally just Google Why Will No One Play With Me, and I was just doing it today and it comes up. But also, if you go to CarolineMaguireAuthor.com, that's my website. I have videos on how to have these conversations. There's all kinds of good stuff there, and how to buy the book.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, listener, for joining us. We'll be back with more interesting conversations, and we really appreciate your time.
Have a great day.